Welcome to Podula Rasa. I'm David Blank.
And I'm Jim Esch.
This is a podcast about finding something in nothing.
Hey there, this is Jim. Our exploration of the life and influence of Thom Williams continues. This is fragment 10 of the Thom Williams Experience. For today's show, we feature an interview with David Foreman, a student of Thom's who was influenced in slightly different ways from some of the other people we've interviewed. Let's turn right to our discussion. Welcome to Podula Rasa.
Thanks.
We learned about you through your friend Maury Joseph. Tell us a little bit about your background, like where you come from in Marple Newtown and when you graduated and stuff.
Sure. Yep. So I went to Marple Newtown in the early 2000s. I graduated in 2005. Grew up just in Delaware County. First kind of, 5 or 6 years I was in Yeadon. So like when I was a kid, and then we moved to Newtown Square basically in time for elementary school. So was in Marple, went to Culbertson, then Paxton, and then the high school, which is where I met Thom.
What were your first impressions of Thom Williams?
So I remember specifically because I was taking pre-calc, I think, and whoever the pre-calc teacher was, and you didn't need to take pre-calc to graduate. I was a sophomore and I had taken enough math to be able to graduate. And she was like, I don't think you want to do this. She told me that it was like, this isn't for you. Why don't you go figure something else out? And I saw like there were only a couple classes left that had some space open. And one of them was a speech class, like public speaking. And that was Thom's class. And I was interested in public speaking to begin with. I had heard, people had positive things to say about him, but I was only a sophomore. So usually you didn't, at least while I was in high school, Thom was teaching juniors and seniors. So I hadn't really gotten in with him yet. And it was amazing, right? Like walking into a class where I think it was the first class that I took that, was an elective that you chose to take, that it was truly inspiring. And I'm not saying that lightly, right? Because, there are a lot of great teachers and I'm not disparaging any of them, because there are just tons of wonderful teachers that I ran into in Marple Newtown. But what I mean by the inspiration is that it kind of went beyond the scope of the class itself, if that makes sense. And so it was really kind of outside of, the band director who, Maury and I and a lot of other people, is Mike Massimo, worked with. Outside of him, I think Thom was the first one who really impacted or got you to start thinking in different ways about how you interact with just other people, your everyday life. And and in that speech class, what was really cool that you were in a group where you had the cheerleaders, football players. I was in sports too. I played lacrosse and swam and played soccer, ran cross country in addition to being in band. But so you had all these different groups of people, and Thom had a way of bringing the best out of everyone. And I think one of the things that about him that he taught me a lot, but one of the things that he taught me that really sticks with me and that I think has set me apart professionally, as just moving forward, is that because I was in the Navy as well. I was in the Navy for 9 years. After I graduated from college, I was a surface warfare officer. And I think one of the things that made me an effective officer, but also has continued to make me effective, I work for Salesforce now as a solution engineer, is that people have so much more capacity than they even recognize, right? And so you had these people in Thom's class who in other classes, teachers, peers, didn't expect a lot out of them because they were a cheerleader. So they're just like a dumb cheerleader, or he's just a dumb jock, right? That was those were completely broken down by Thom, right? None of that mattered. And he showed me that if you expect things of people, if you inspire people to kind of go past what they view as their own barriers, boy, do they have a lot of capability, right? And it's just remarkable, how impactful I think that has been on my professional career, because you just don't take people for at face value, right?
Right.
You do what you can do to try to bring the best out of everybody, no matter what situation that you're in. And that's selfishly to a certain extent, right? Because you want to, if you're a leader or a manager, you want to get the most out of your people. But at the same time, it's incredibly, I mean, for me personally, it's incredibly satisfying when you can tell that someone is proud of what they've accomplished, because you've had a small part in pushing them to accomplish that. And Thom was really the first person that I saw who was really good at that, and did it just because I think he instilled that in me. Like, he get that satisfaction of seeing these kids just do so much more than they even thought was possible, because of his influence.
That's awesome. It squares with what I've heard from other former students, myself included. Just this idea that it was a big tent in his class,
Yeah.
and no one was canceled out of it, and he sort of expected. He saw a potential in people, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And he didn't look at the stereotype. He just looked at the person and what they were capable of. Did you take any other classes with him aside from the public speaking?
Yeah, I mean, ended up taking an English class. I ended up taking, probably some other class, but I spent a lot of time in there, regardless of whether or not I was actively, I actually was enrolled in one of his classes. I think one of the things he saw in me, and it's funny, and because Mari, I think, falls into this category as well, is that by the time we were kind of rising seniors, like late juniors, rising and into senior year, we definitely had the potential to get ourselves in trouble. Not because we were bad kids or anything like that, but I think he sensed that we were starting to get bored. Right. And it's we were ready for that next step, because there were a couple of classes, particularly my senior year, that I can think of that outside of music, one was AP Government, the other was AP English, that were very challenging. But outside of that, it was I'm ready for the next step, whatever this is. And so instead of channeling that energy into something negative, Thom provided a space where you could, as long as you were producing something of worth, and it wasn't the one defining the worth, right? He really left that to you and he helped you get there, right? He coached you to better understand what it was you wanted to pursue. And he gave you, I spent, I don't know, a lot of time. And so it feels like I was in class with him a lot, when in reality, I probably only actually took 2 or 3 of his classes. But the amount of time that he was willing to invest in his students, even when it was in an informal capacity, was really, really remarkable.
Your name came up when I was interviewing Mari, and he had this amazing story about a book that you wrote, and then they helped raise funds for it. So could you sort of tell your side of that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was what Thom eventually channeled my energy, or helped me channel my energy into, right? I didn't consider myself a particularly talented writer. But I mean, by the end of writing that book, writing is one of my strongest talents. I think not writing, but being able to articulate an idea, I should say, because I'm not like some verbose writer that just has like I have endless ideas about what to write about. Not that, but if I have to, in an email or even verbally, right, has helped me tremendously to just be able to think about an idea, really do some self introspection about what that idea is and how I want to bring that idea to life. And he coached me through that. The amount of patience that he had to, I was 17, 16, 17 to write a book. It was about politics at the time because I was very, very political, and to these, everything from like education to guns to women's rights, whatever. It just to be able to have a 16, 17-year-old kid build a cohesive argument around these pretty challenging topics. I mean, took some doing, I think, on his part, right? But anyway, so we started he just gave me topics to write about. He'd say, like, go write about this or go write about that. And after we did 4 or 5, he said, like, if you kind of commit yourself and we refine this a little bit, you could put this together and make it a book. And I was like, oh man, like who would publish like a book about political musings from a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid? And he was like, he said, I bet you we could find somebody. And so there was this small printing shop. It's gone now. It's called Infinity Publishing. And they did like a hybrid of, like, it wasn't a fully self-published book, because that's incredibly expensive. Like we would have never been able to afford that. But they did like, essentially like you paid for them to do the mock-up. So it's like we had to raise $500, right? It's like not a ton of money, but a lot of money for a high school kid, right? It's not like, and not something like, I didn't come from the wealthiest of backgrounds, so not something my parents could just like write a check for. Right. And so once we got the book together and he was like, I bet you like we could get somebody to publish this. We did some research. We found these guys. We met with them and they were willing to do it. And they said, if you guys can get $500 together, like we'll do a run of these books. So we were thinking like, okay, like how are we going to raise $500? And I don't remember if it was Mari's idea or Thom's idea or what my contribution was, probably pretty minimal. But what they came up with, or what we came up with, was this, we'll write a song about you, right? And so Thom pitched it to the principal because we were going to be like asking kids and teachers and stuff for money. And so generally speaking, I don't know how receptive people would have been to that idea, but Thom had a way of kind of getting the administration to allow him to do unique things. And I think it's because they saw the positive outcome, that he wasn't just, even though it kind of felt like you were cheating a little bit or like screwing around like during the school day. Truth be told, that it's tremendously enriching educational experience. It's just a little different. It's not the I'm sitting in history class or whatever, right? It's more practical. Perfectly honest with you, that being able to bring this idea to fruition and then taking ownership and figuring out how do you bring your vision to life, and understanding that oftentimes that means motivating the people around you to getting them excited about the idea to support you, because you can't do it alone, right? And so to figure that all out as a kid, I mean, I don't know how many people get that opportunity, but anyway. So we got the blessing of the principal. He actually was one of the first ones to buy a song. He bought to kind of show his support. And I believe we charged $10. And so what we did was, and so that's 50 songs, right? Like it took, and we probably ended up doing more just because people liked it. But what would happen is, so while I was writing like in his classroom, Mari and Thom would sit in like the front left corner at his desk, and they would interview people. So like even people who like we didn't really know, so it's some people who we knew it was easy, right? Because you knew them and you could write a song about them. But the word got around and a lot of people just wanted a song written about them. And so Thom and Mari would interview them, like talk to them about like who they were, like what they were proud of, like what they like, try to figure out what was unique because about the person that they were speaking to write this song about them. They'd interview them. They'd spend a couple days kind of messing around with the song. And then on the weekend, again, I would go over to Thom's house with Mari and I would be writing and Thom and Mari would be in the studio recording this song. Right. So it was kind of the double commitment, right? That it's like they weren't just going to do this music that I had to, even though I wasn't the one actively doing the music, I was over there putting in some time writing, also, just hanging out, giving him some feedback in his studio, and that's what we did for a number of months, every weekend to bring this to life. And it was remarkable. I mean, at one point before the morning announcements, there was always a song, and the principal started playing the songs that Mari and Thom wrote because we would make these CDs, and he would, whatever the song was that they had just written, we'd make an extra CD, give it to the principal, and he'd play their song at the beginning of the day.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I mean, I hadn't really talked about it in this detail in a while, and talking about it now, it sounds kind of unbelievable, right? It sounds like something out of like a high school movie, like the ideal, like the idealized, like what you would hope that you could do if you had that kind of supportive teacher and administration, and we got to do it.
So you were writing the book while they were writing the songs? That's right. Did you have any hand in writing the lyrics at all? Or?
No. I mean, maybe like they would be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And I'd be like, yeah, whatever. But no, that was Mari and Thom. That was their baby.
How did the book do? Like, so you obviously it went into print, and where did you sell it, and how was it received?
I mean, I honestly didn't track sales specifically because I didn't. It wasn't about money, and like I don't mean that in like an altruistic way. To be perfectly honest with you, it's just that it was about the accomplishment itself, right? So I mean, I think we sold like at the high school probably. Let's see. Each box had like 100 copies. I don't know, probably like 600 or 700 books, like at the high school itself. And then it was online. It was on Amazon and like whatever. And so I mean, I don't know. I think it's still on Amazon actually, and you could go and like you can see there's some reviews for it. So people looked at it, people bought it. But I mean, probably a couple thousand, maybe, nothing like nothing like transformative, but it was more, like I said, it was the journey for sure. Like that was the important part about this. It was, and I think what publishing the book taught me was that, because I mean, you're 15, 16 years old, like even like a couple months before that was a thing. If someone had told me like, you're going to publish a book before you're out of high school, I'd be like, get out of here. Cause like, I don't consider myself like a particularly intelligent guy. Like if I'm being like honest with myself, I'm above average intelligence, right? But I'm not like a genius. And I think he showed me that just because you're maybe not as naturally gifted in certain areas, if you really want to do something, if you have a passion for something and you put in the work, you can make it happen. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but I don't feel that way, right? Like I really don't. Like it's something that even for something that I can reflect on very recently, like I mentioned, I worked for Salesforce, fairly new. I was working for Oracle before, and during the transition, or during COVID, I transitioned to Salesforce. And one of the things you have to do, you have to take, for me, because I'm a solution engineer, you have these technical, very difficult exams that you have to pass to kind of get your credentials so you can do your job. And
Right.
people who are more technical than me, people who have more experience than me, have failed, right, those exams. And that's common, right? Like, they're hard. And I'm not saying this to, like, as a negative for them, or trying
Right.
to puff myself up. But what I am saying is that even with that context, for me, from the experience, I think, like, one of the things that I learned with the book is just knowing that if you want to do something, you just, like, you start working right away, right? There's no, like, you don't ever approach a situation thinking that you know it, that if you need to learn it, like, you need to put in the time, and there's no magic pill, right? It's just work, it's just studying, it's just whatever it is that you need to do, and you get it done. And I was able to pass each of those exams first shot, which was great for me, like, just huge kind of relief, weight off my chest. But I think it traces that back, 15 years or whatever, to when I was, or 17, 18 years now. That's terrifying. But
How do you think I feel?
Yeah. But it is, whenever I think of those things, it's like, I was just very lucky to be able to meet Thom at a time in my life when I think it was a critical point. And it's not to say that things would have gone off the rails or I would have turned out radically differently, but I do believe that his influence set me on a road to be more successful earlier than I would have been otherwise.
Just as another sidebar, I'm just curious about, you said the book was sort of political in nature, sort of your platform or your ideas about what should be done.
Yeah, it was called Our House. It was called Our House. So yeah, a young man's plan for America. Very, very lofty.
It sounds like you were about to run for office or something.
Yeah. No, it was like if I were president, basically. It was like that's what I wanted to do at that time. I was like, I could be president one day, which, like, does not appeal to me at the moment. My wife is the politician in the family. She ran for state house in this election cycle during the primary. She didn't win, but she ran for state house. Now she is continuing to work. She's on the board of the Media Upper Providence Library. Is a member of the local NAACP, the Delaware County Black Caucus. So, like, she's out there moving and shaking, and so. To be perfectly honest, I think, partially because of my experience in the military, partially just because of my personality, the current political climate just doesn't. I have no interest in it. There's it's too many games being played, and also I think I'm pretty moderate, even though I'm a left-leaning moderate. And just the way things are, I don't think I could ever win a primary. Like, just because it's like, I think I could get both sides mad at me, depending on the issue. But I'm still very passionate about politics. But I tend not to identify. I'm a registered Democrat, but particularly in Washington, I tend not to identify with either side. I just think there's so much. Well, what it is, and what I think when people ask me is that what I think I've been beginning to see is that, like, in the military, people could have the most heated discussions, like more heated than you would see, like even on the debates, right? As terrible as they were. But in the end, once a decision was made, once there was a mission to be accomplished, no matter what level of disagreement you had before, didn't matter, because everybody knew there was a mission that had to be done, and that's what was important. And I think people in DC have completely lost sight of that. The vast majority have, not everyone, but the vast majority are there jockeying for power's sake. They just want to beat the Republicans or beat the Democrats. Right. And I find that fundamentally distasteful. That it's like, you know, the goal should be a better United States. The goal should be what's best for the majority of people. And you should work through it. And once a decision is made, like, you know, you shouldn't, like Mitch McConnell did for like Obama's entire presidency, you shouldn't try to undercut the president at every turn. Like, you know, you can oppose him when you have opposing viewpoints, but once a decision is made, like, you don't play games to try to make them not successful. And that, to me, like, I can see a way out of that, it would be very hard for me to sink the time and money and be away from my children to just like be involved in a power struggle when I don't think they're really focused on bettering things for the American people.
It's a very dysfunctional system we have right now. It's broken. But have your politics evolved since the time in high school when you wrote the book? Or are you still pretty much in the same sort of, if you went back and reread that book, would you still agree with it, what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's like 80-20, you know? It's I'd say like 80% I'm still pretty, still agree with, and then 20% probably not. Like, I think the one position that's evolved most was I wrote a section on guns. And after having been in the military, I think a lot of and I think probably for a lot of people, the reason that they're so anti having any type of weapons is just because you're afraid of them. You don't know how to use them safely. And so because you're afraid of them and you don't understand them, it's very hard to see, like, well, if you know how to use it, it's not scary at all. Right. Like, and now that's not to say that there should be assault weapons in with private people, or that you should have these like ridiculously long like magazines. You know, some weapons are military weapons and they should be regulated or banned. But I don't think all guns should be banned. I don't think it's that simple. And because of that, I think that one in particular is where I've evolved the most, because I was much more like, well, like, why do you even need a gun? Yeah. So, but other than that, I mean, pretty much everything else I've stayed pretty consistent on. Yeah, I think that's true.
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks so much for this. This is like really fascinating to hear your perspective on things, because every former student we talk to of Thom's is unique. They have their own sort of niche or interest that they had.
When you mentioned like how like you find your niche, like that just made me think of something. So one of the, I guess, two things really. So the first is that because I wasn't like a shy kid at all, but I definitely wasn't the most self-confident. And being in particularly with girls when I was like a younger kid in high school, and being in his speech class where you had all of these the quote unquote like popular girls, because because I was a I'm a pretty talented athlete in my own right. I floated in those circles, but I still had my own hangups. But you had these girls who, because of something intellectual that I was good at, that I was a good public speaker, right? That I could articulate things that, for whatever reason, connected with what they were thinking or feeling. The fact that I was able to receive that validation in his class gave me a lot of confidence, right? It's that, and like got you thinking like, well, you can get recognized for what you're good at. It doesn't have to be what other people are good at or what generally people think is like the cool thing or the in thing. It's that if you're good, people can sense when you're doing something that like is a calling or that you have a particular talent in, and they're drawn to that. And like we experienced that with music. We experienced that with in his speech class. And I think getting that confidence was critical when I was in the Navy, because if I didn't have that confidence, I don't think I would have been a very good officer. I probably would have been overly mean or really tried to put up a facade to try to convey my authority. And because I saw people who would do that, right? Who like would portray themselves to their sailors a certain way when they weren't really that way, because they were nervous. They weren't confident in themselves. Because when you're an ensign, you don't know anything. Like your sailor, you're completely reliant on your sailors because you know nothing, right? That's a weird position to be in when you're also supposed to be their leader. And if you aren't confident within yourself and figure out what you can bring to the table, that I think was a really critical lesson. And his class, and it helped give me that confidence to where, like, at the end of my first deployment, I received something called the Navy Achievement Medal. When I came home, I gave it to his wife because I had spoke to him on the phone while I was on deployment. He passed while I was on deployment. And so I spoke to him while he was in his hospital bed, but I didn't get to see him because I was overseas. But I really felt compelled to, like, I provided her with my medal and my citation because, like, everything that was said in that citation, I felt like if I didn't have the foundation that Thom gave me, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Like, because one of the things that I did that was which was scary at first, is I was the intelligence officer, and one of the things I was supposed to do, we were messing around. Primarily, it was called counter illicit trafficking operations, which ended up primarily being like cocaine and then human trafficking were kind of the two things that we were interdicting. And there's a little bit of pot, but mostly cocaine, and we were screwing around with human traffickers, which is like a really harrowing thing. But anyway, so my job was we would get intelligence from all these disparate sources. My job was to synthesize it with my sailors and then present it to the CO, XO, the ward room, and present my recommendation for where we should go, like where we should position the ship to ensure we would have the greatest likelihood of interdicting these bad guys. So that the presentation skills that I learned, like, were critical, like from his speech class. But even more than that, like, just being confident enough to know when you can say, I don't know, right? And being confident in that it's not going to make you sound silly. Like, there's, like, one of the things he told me is that, people the only time that you saying I don't know removes your credibility is if you've already tried to BS somebody. If you've already tried to BS somebody and it didn't work and you say I don't know, you lost your credibility. But if you say I don't know first, most of the time you don't lose your credibility. That was one of the things Thom told me. And then the other thing was, from a presentation standpoint that I've kept with me, is not to be afraid of silence. Like, how to get rid of the ums and ahs and all that stuff is to not, because people don't notice. it feels like an eternity to you, but if you just take a couple seconds like that, it doesn't come across, right? And all of those things, I think, really fed into how effectively I executed that job,
Right.
which resulted in me getting that award. That was one of the first times in my professional career where I realized, like, wow, like I owe this guy a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, everything you just said translates into teaching too. It with the pauses, not being afraid of silence,
Yeah.
and you sort of being confident in the classroom, all that is, and not BSing people, you and being honest about what you don't know. I mean, I try to do that when I teach too. Just be honest, be candid.
Yeah.
And I try to guide my students that way too, and at least model it, and hopefully something rubs off. But I think I learned just Thom had an interesting way in the classroom too. Like even though he was a big guy and had this aura, sort of a presence to him that was unmistakable, he wasn't, he was sort of a quiet guy in the classroom in his way. I don't know if that was the way he was with you. But
absolutely. I mean, I remember multiple times when he was trying to get people's attention, he would never raise his voice. He would say whatever he said. And if people weren't paying attention, he'd just go sit down in his chair. And he would just open up a newspaper and start reading his newspaper. And like that got people's attention. And it was like, oh, you guys are ready for me? Oh, thanks. It's like, I'm not here for myself. Like, you guys go. You don't want to learn? That's on you.
Right.
And like, not every teacher could pull that off. Right. But it's like the kids in his class had a level of respect for him that they were like, oh, ooh, what's going on? Uh-oh, I made a mistake. Thom is the epitome of somebody who has, left his imprint on the world, and I'll pass some of the lessons that he taught me on to my kids. So he'll, his influence will hopefully, and hopefully my kids will pass it on to theirs if they found it valuable, and his influence would just, carry on and steamroll through the generations, because it's just, that's the kind of guy that he was. He has that power to influence people for good even today.
Well, Dave, thanks so much.
Yeah, good talking to you, Jim.
Just to add a coda to our show, you can still see Dave Foreman's book, Our House, A Young Man's Plan for America, on Amazon.com. There is a listing for it. Apparently one copy is for sale for $9.95. It's in paperback. We'll share the link to the book in our Pagula Rasa website, pagilarasa.com. Finally, Dave was kind enough to give me the one CD he still had of the Maury Joseph Thom Williams songs, and the title of the CD is Our House, Songs by Joseph Williams, and it's tracks 15 through 28. Unfortunately, none of my CD drives or CD players or DVD players are able to read the disc, alas. So I'll keep trying to clean it and see if there's any way to salvage what's on here. Dave says he's able to hear it on his own Xbox, so there's hope maybe. But we wanted to share that music with you, and unfortunately we couldn't. But here are some track listings. We have tracks such as A Different Beauty, Alyssa, It's a Mystery, Allison, Queen of the Heat, Arpy Doesn't Want To, Old School Girl, Get Her, Naked Was the Answer, Aries Got to Be Free, Eileen, We're Going Off Road, The Fingerprint, Mrs. Foreman, and Principal Suspect. Maybe one day we'll hear those tunes. Thanks so much to Dave for all your viewpoints, and we wish you the best. To everyone else, Please subscribe to the podcast. If this is your first time, you can go to anchor.fm or your favorite podcasting app and just click the subscribe button. Lots of goodies in the archives if you want to listen to where we've been up to this point. And until next time, Dave and I wish you all the best in this holiday season. Stay well. Peace out.